You're listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz. I'm Ty Polk with Chris Ward and Brandon Walker. It's time to preview Steelers versus Bengals this Sunday from Heinz Field. And it's a walking mash unit for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. As I take a look at the injury list, they have 9 names on their injury and participation report for week 3 this Wednesday, September 22nd. That's when we're doing this podcast. And Chris, let's just go through a little bit of these. Ben Roethlisberger did not practice, along with Diontae Johnson and Alex Highsmith, Carlos Davis. Only really Eric Ebron, who was a coaching decision.
Yeah, Ben, you expect, Wednesdays, Ben usually takes off anyway. Diontae Johnson with a knee there. But it is good to see that T.J. Watt was limited. And Joe Hayden also, and Devin Bush was a full participant. So that's good news with the groins. There's 4 players. Alex Highsmith is also dealing with a groin injury. And then, as I mentioned, Bush, Watt, and Hayden, they also have groins. So that'll be interesting to watch. Groin injuries are always tricky. You really like the how severe they are. It always, kind of depends on the player, or, there's different grades to them also. So it's always up in the air.
Hit the nail right on the head, Chris. We can't deny they might not be able to. If they don't practice Friday, they won't play. According to Tom, that's the rule. So they have to progress the next couple of days. And Tuitt is not going to play this week, is he not?
Yeah, he's not on the list. He's already on the reserve, so he's not going to be available until week 6.
Week 6, okay. Because I thought he could have came back at week 4. I thought it was 3 games.
I thought it was week 4. I wasn't sure I thought it was 3 weeks, 3 games or whatever, and then by next week he could come off. But I'll have to see for sure.
What do you think is the main injury that you're concerned about for this particular week against Cincinnati?
I think they need T.J. Watt because what we saw once he went down, the defense kind of just, Alex Highs, Melvin Ingram did get some pressure, but that was pretty much it, really. I mean, Derek Carr was pretty much just back there, throwing the ball without any pressure in his face. Completely different on the other side with how Ben was getting hit and stuff. It wasn't like that for the Steelers defense on Sunday.
I have a different belief. I believe that it's Joe Hayden and maybe Devin Bush alongside it, so I'll be cheating and have 2. But Devin Bush helps out a lot in the pass coverage situation, and Schobert sometimes just got waxed out there by Darren Waller and also the other Raiders tight end. I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now.
Carricker.
Oh, no. Moreau, I think, the guy that scored the touchdown.
Whoever it is, the other tight ends for them. Any help in pass coverage situation, because while I trust Spillane in the run game, I wouldn't necessarily want him back there in the passing situation.
Not at all, but he wasn't the problem in the pass coverage on Sunday. He has been in the past, but not Sunday.
Yeah, it was more Schobert, like you guys mentioned, and then James Pierre didn't really have a good game there filling in for Joe Hayden. Ruggs and Renfro they had their way with him. And then Sutton, he didn't have a game like he did against Buffalo. He missed a tackle and didn't really have much of an impact. So definitely, and Fitzpatrick, he gave up that big touchdown to Ruggs, the 61-yarder. So definitely looking for a bounce-back performance from the secondary after they played pretty well against Buffalo in week 1.
And now let's talk about the score line for Steelers versus Bengals. And, of course, score lines always fluctuate between today and Sunday, but I heard that it's at least a very close game at this moment right now, Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to check right now, but yesterday when I checked, it was 3.5 points the Steelers were favored by. It started out like a 6.5, and it kept on dropping. It was like, I think it was 4.5 on Monday night. Oh, now it's down to 3, straight 3. 43.5 points, the over under. I think the Roethlisberger Peck to the left side is not a non-throwing side. But still, it's injury nevertheless. And then the Steelers have a ton of injuries they're dealing with right now. I think has really dropped the spread line.
So, that is a fair line. I think these teams are very similar. They're very tight. They're more tight than during the past few years. So I really think this is a toss-up game. I think if this was in Cincinnati, Cincinnati would be have that 3-point spread, I believe.
Yeah, I can see that also.
So
I think it's favorable to the home team.
Right, yeah, you get 3 points just for being the home team. So basically, it's an even game, a toss-up game. So we'll see in our predictions. I got to think about it in the next 20 minutes of who I'll pick.
Here's some stats from OddsShark. Bengals are 1-11 straight up in their last 12 games against the Steelers, and are 1-18-1 straight up in their last 20 games on the road. Well, I thought that stat was pretty interesting. And Cincinnati is also 2-15 straight up in its last 17 games against 8 AFC North opponents. And the Steelers are 1-4 against the spread in their last 5 home games.
The movable force versus the
stoppable object.
Object. So therefore, something's got to give.
Yeah, and we saw last year the Steelers, they really got embarrassed in Cincinnati last year. You remember that Vonn Bell hit on Juju Smith-Schuster, and prior to that loss, the Steelers won 11 straight. So it should be interesting on Sunday with Joe Burrow coming to Heinz Field for the second time.
Hold up, they didn't snap that 11-game losing streak.
It was the Washington football team, then the Bengals.
No, I'm talking about the Bengals. They beat them 11 straight times.
Oh, they beat this bank. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Remember from the wild card game. So you are right about that. So, guys, it's time to talk to our next guest as we'll find out more about the Cincinnati Bengals. And we'd like to welcome Charlie Goldsmith. He covers the Bengals for the Cincinnati Enquirer. Charlie, thanks for being on the show.
How are you guys doing? It's nice to meet you guys.
It's all great.
Nice to meet you too.
Heading into week 3, every team in the AFC North has a record of 1-1. And both the Steelers and the Bengals are coming off losses after week 1 wins. Joe Burrow threw 3 interceptions on 3 consecutive passes in Sunday's loss to Chicago. Burrow said after the game that he never threw 3 interceptions in one game in his career. And that's going from there all the way down to LSU, even in the high school, which is just absolutely incredible. But through 2 games, what's the general feel in Cincinnati about this Bengals team?
There's a lot of positive, and there are a lot of areas that they're being very frank about feeling the need to improve. Week 1 was a lot of the positive. Joe Mixon led the NFL in rushing, and it's that they're hoping can be the backbone of the offense. That they hope is the difference between last year's offense and this year's offense to unlock the rest of it, the playmakers they had down the field. Against Minnesota, they executed that to a T. But in Chicago, there were some schematic errors, some pass protection mistakes, some communication errors to where until there were 5 minutes left, they never got there. So the feeling is while Joe Burrow has made huge strides, while they're extremely confident in their wide receiver trio, they're at the point, like any team is, on the train, going on the path from 2 wins to 4 wins to ideally what they're expecting, 7 or more this season. There's growing pains and there's consistency issues. And those are kind of what you expect. That's what they're battling through right now. But overall, I mean, they're counting on the offense to be the focal point of the whole team.
And Charlie, what has been the biggest improvement early on for the Bengals, and what has you the most optimistic in the future for this Bengals team?
Yeah, they took Jamarr Chase, and so far meeting every expectation. They completed 2 deep balls last season. 2. In the first 2 weeks of the season, Jamarr Chase has caught 2 deep balls for touchdowns. So that is a significant improvement, a schematic element they didn't have before. And Chase just stepping right back into the comfort level that he had at LSU with Joe Burrow.
Burrow has been sacked 9 times this year in just 2 games. Has took him numerous hits. Burrow is also coming off an ACL injury. However, he managed to play pretty well and still completed almost 70% of his passes. and had a 95 passer rating. What is your assessment on Burrow so far in this season, and what's going on with the offensive line? How do you feel about that in 2 games into the season?
Yeah, you're asking the right question, and that's the same question the Bengals coaching staff is asking, and they're not even looking at it just the offensive line, it's pass protection in general. Week 1, the Bengals had 5 sacks, and 3 of those weren't because of the offensive line. 1 was a coverage sack, 1 was a running back missing a block, and 1 was a tight end missing a block. Then this past week against Chicago, they had 1 huge sack where a running back missed a block. They had another huge sack where they were supposed to run a screen, but the wide receiver running the screen forgot to run the screen. So Joe Burrow had no choice to make there but get sacked. Again, it's not just one offensive lineman is playing awful and they're getting exposed. That's what happened last season. This season's more schematic. Again, I like the word growing pains to describe the inconsistency because it's an offense with a high ceiling, but they all need to just be on the same page first.
Well, let's talk about that weakness in terms of schematic. What has changed from last year to this year with the Bengals? Was it a new offensive line coach, and have they drafted new players? Because everyone's heard about Penei Sewell. They passed on him for Chase. Just what has changed with the Bengals offensive line that we have to look out for?
It's a two-part. That's a two-part answer. One is like the offense in general. That is Chase and the deep threat that I mentioned. But the other is exactly it, the new offensive line coach. And he's not just their offensive line coach. He's their run game coordinator. And a big piece, a little bit of history. They got this guy, Frank Pollock, basically comes from the Kubiak wide zone coaching tree. He was in Dallas when it was really, that offense was really established in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And Pollock has brought that with him at every stop he went. And he has brought that to Cincinnati. The result has been considerably more snaps under center for Burrow, more play action looks under center for Burrow, and more two tight end sets as well, even fullbacks from time to time. So the Bengals are trying different things in the run game. They're doing different types of runs than they did last season. Again, it worked incredibly well against Minnesota, against Chicago. Mixon averaged just like 3 yards per carry, but the Bengals kind of had to pass for most of the game anyway because they were down. But it is definitely a more balanced offense with more of an emphasis on the run game in general.
And in my opinion, running back Joe Mixon is one of the more underrated players in the league. So far this year, he's averaging 4.0 yards per carry. Do you see Mixon getting a healthy dose of carries on Sunday to help the Bengals be more balanced and protect Burrow from dropping back on a consistent basis, especially given the Steelers' vaunted pass rush?
Yeah, so even in Chicago, as the offense was struggling and as the Bengals were down, on first and second downs before the last 4 minutes of the game, the Bengals basically had a 50-50 split between run and pass. You know, sometimes on third down, you just have to throw the ball. Sometimes in the last 4 minutes, you just have to throw the ball. But aside from those situations, the Bengals were balanced. Again, that is the Frank Pollock influence and the increased impact and role of the run game in general in the Bengals offense this year. So fully, I'm expecting Joe Mixon to be very involved on Sunday.
All right. Speaking of, we talked about Jamar Chase at LSU. They also have other receivers like T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd in the receiving corps. Chase is averaging 22.1 yards a catch on his 7 receptions this year, and he has 2 touchdown receptions. What are your thoughts so far on Jamar Chase? Do you think he's actually worth not picking Sewell at this point? And how do you feel about the receiving corps overall and all the pass catchers, tight ends included?
So I think that Jamar Chase is impacting the Bengals offense more than Sewell could have. But the Bengals still made a mistake by not addressing their offensive line as much as he did. I've mentioned a few times just the different look Chase is able to give the Bengals offense. But the flip side of that is this. On one hand, the Bengals didn't sign a single offensive guard in free agency. On the other side of that, the guard they drafted, Jackson Carman, showed up to camp out of shape. He worked his way all the way down to the 3rd string unit, has worked his way up to 2nd string, and here's an inside scoop. Xavier Su'a-Filo, their starting offensive guard, hasn't practiced this week, so Carman could actually make his debut in the starting lineup on Sunday. It's been a roller coaster for him, and if they would have drafted Sewell, I think he would have been playing guard this season. So again, that's not the tackle that you could have drafted at 5, because the Bengals had 2 tackles heading into the draft in Williams and in Reif. That was their belief. That's where they were organizationally. One's a first-round pick. The other is a premier free agent in their mind that they signed, and they weren't moving those guys. So if they would have drafted Sewell, it would have been to be a guard. And problem is, though, the guards they have aren't anywhere near as good as Sewell would have been.
Wow. So they would have, instead of like primarily as he's built out as a tackle, they put him inside. That's interesting.
That's what I've heard. Yeah. Because again, Jonah Williams was the first pick of the Zach Taylor era. Basically, the first thing they said this offseason was no matter what happens, Williams will be at left tackle. So that meant if they would have drafted Sewell, it would have been right. And then they went out and gave Riley Reif a 2-year, $14 million deal and promised him that he would be their right tackle. So they were stuck, and there was nowhere else to put Sewell.
Interesting. So let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. And the Bengals have always had a pretty good defensive line. I always think of guys like Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap and so much other guys on that line. But last year they were still dead last in sacks, but through 2 games this year, they have 6 sacks. And Mike Tomlin raved about this defensive line. They have Sam Hubbard, DJ Reader, Larry Ogunjubi, and Trey Hendrickson, who was signed in free agency alongside Ogunjubi. And Reader played in just 5 games last year before he was sidelined with a quad injury for the rest of the year. It really is a new look defensive line for the Bengals. Just talk about how impressed you've been with this new group of defensive linemen.
I mean, they cleaned house. Even their defensive line coach changed. And the most noticeable difference is last season, the Bengals created 0 pressure up the middle. Here's what happened in 2021. On one drive in the first week of the season, they had more sacks by interior defensive linemen than they had all of last season. Bengals defensive linemen as a whole already have about half as many sacks as the entire defensive line had in 16 games last year. So it's a new unit, and it's a unit that's actually producing and getting to the quarterback on the defensive line. And I mean, you guys know how important that is in the modern NFL. I mean, that it really is night and day. They've completely changed personnel. They've invested $100 million in the line, $104 million in the line, plus a 3rd round pick, plus a 4th round pick, plus a 7th round pick. And the production, the investment, you're getting more from it.
And on Charlie, at linebacker, they have a trio of Logan Wilson, Akeem Davis-Gaither, and Jermaine Pratt. Wilson had an interception in Sunday's game against the Bears, and there have been a lot of good things said about the young linebacker. What are your thoughts on Wilson and the overall linebacker group?
So just real quick, and again, like we watch our team, we do the best we can. Like, so the Bengals scheme, their thing is they got 2 linebackers on the field always. So Davis Gaither's in that rotational pass defense role, kind of platooning with Pratt, who's on the field when the Bengals are in a run-oriented down. And that scheme overall, I mean, it's not a group that they've invested the most in. They're 31st in the entire NFL in linebacker spending. It's a 3rd round pick, a 3rd round pick, and a 4th round pick, young guys, and that's it. But, it's a group that, again, they're hoping again, the platoon factor, almost to borrow a baseball term, is able to make the most of that unit. And I think Wilson's taken a big step forward. He's become a 3-down linebacker this year after playing a rotational role last year. Made a great play to get that pick on Sunday, recognizing where he needed to be in space. And I think a big part, too, of them not signing a linebacker is because they had faith in Wilson taking that step this year.
All right, man. Let's move on to the secondary. Well, you have one of the better safety combos in the league, and strong safety Vonn Bell, and free safety Jessie Bates III, who's not happy with his contract, but that's a different story for a different day. But he's one of the best in the game. And then you have cornerback. You got Trey Waynes, Chidobe Abuuzi, Eli Apple, and you replace William Jackson, who went to the Washington football team, with former Steeler cornerback Mike Hilton. How do you feel about the secondary, and what are your impressions on Mike Hilton?
I'll start with Mike. He gives the Bengals a playmaker that they didn't have last season. His ability to blitz, his ability to keep the offenses off balance by disguising what he does I mean, you're seeing it. The Bengals know firsthand as well as anybody what he can do, and he has brought an explosiveness that they hadn't previously had in the nickel cornerback spot, so much that Hilton is basically an every down player for the Bengals. And then on top of that, I think Chidobe Awuzie has been a real pleasant surprise in one-on-one coverage. Trey Waynes has been hurt. He's questionable for this week, maybe more doubtful for this week after not practicing today. And the Bengals need him, because without him, Eli Apple has really, really struggled in one-on-one coverage. Opposing teams have really went after him. And I wouldn't be shocked if Apple gets another start this week to see Pittsburgh do the same.
Do you guys miss William Jackson?
That's a great question. So what they did was they made a bet that in the NFL, it's more important to have depth in the secondary than a true number one guy. And basically, instead of Jackson, they used those resources, that cap space, to get Awuzie and Hilton, making the bet that having a great number 2 and a great number 3 make up for the fact that they didn't have Jackson, who is their best one-on-one cornerback last season. So far, I guess they've been proven right, because Waynes isn't starting, so Apple has really been picked on, which shows you that it's not necessarily who your best guy is, it's who your worst guy is. You know, that train of thought kind of has been backed up in more of a negative way for the Bengals, but I see what they were doing.
Yeah, the team, both teams really, especially, it's not just records, but when you really take a look at the Bengals versus the Steelers, especially at least on the offensive line side for them, I think at least the Steelers have optimally a better guard situation, but the tackle situation is around the same.
And the wide receiver situation is the same. They're more similar teams than people give them credit for.
So we're down to our final questions, and what do you think is the one thing that the Bengals will try to exploit with the Steelers, both on offense and defense this week?
Yeah, on offense, the run game, as we mentioned, the Bengals against Chicago, they really leaned on the run game and the quick game to limit the amount of risk Joe Burrow took, as their offensive line and their scheme and their pass protection overall isn't quite yet at the level they want it to be for down the road. So how much are they able to really establish the run different types of runs, keep the box full, because Pittsburgh needs to sell out to stop the runs. And then that opens up options for down the field. And then defensively, I have my eye on Trey Hendrickson. He's their highest paid edge rusher. He's been, so he's a guy who racked up like 13 and a half sacks in New Orleans, but he was getting most of those sacks because they had elite pass rushers around him. This year, he's the number one guy in Cincinnati. And to be honest, he's lived up to expectations. He's doing it. He's getting to the quarterback. He's getting sacks. He's forcing fumbles, and he's been impressive. So Trey Hendrickson against the Steelers left tackle, I think is the real matchup to watch.
And Charlie, what's your biggest concern for Sunday's game?
TJ Watt. Simple as that. Elite pass rushers are the Bengals' weakness. Whether it's Watt or Garrett, or the Ravens have had a few. They played one of the Bosa brothers last season. It's guys like that. Fletcher Cox coming up the middle. They played the Eagles last season. Elite pass rushers are the weakness of the Bengals. And, Khalil Mack, like this random tangent, Khalil Mack, like, isn't quite there yet right now, just how we started the season. So with that in mind, like, the Bengals haven't seen one of those yet this year. The Bengals haven't seen one of the best 5 pass rushers in the league, one of the best 3 pass rushers in the league. And well, here comes TJ Watt. This is the biggest test that they're going to face.
All right. Final question. We go. What's the outcome of the game? How do you think this game's going to turn out? Bengals on the road.
Yeah. This is my first time picking the Bengals over the Steelers in a long time. My final score prediction is Bengals 24 and Steelers 20. The two differences are Trey Hendrickson's ability to get to the quarterback. Carl Lawson destroyed Pittsburgh last season, and the Bengals are leaning on Hendrickson in that same role to really shut down Pittsburgh's offense, which, again, the Bengals did in December of last year, and it's a very improved unit that the Bengals have on top of that. And then the Bengals offense, Pittsburgh caught Joe Burrow in a lot of rookie moments when they played Pittsburgh last season at Heinz Field, and the Steelers blew him out. And I think that the difference between the Steelers offense and the difference between the Bengals offense and the Steelers defense isn't necessarily as significant as the difference between the Bengals defense and the Steelers offense.
And one more thing, is there any injuries with the Bengals that we have to watch out for?
Yep. So as I mentioned, Xavier Suo-Filo is questionable, didn't practice today. That would result in Jackson Carman, who, as I mentioned, has been on a roller coaster, making his first NFL start. The other big one is T. Higgins, their number one receiver. Hasn't practiced this week. Looked to have a shoulder injury on one of the plays against Chicago. He came back in the game and caught a touchdown. But again, he's their number one receiver, incredibly important. And then lastly, Trey Waynes, who I mentioned earlier. Eli Apple would continue to start if Waynes isn't ready.
Oh, add one more about Mike Hilton. I know when he was with the Steelers, he was a great player and always a good interview. I just wanted to know how was he, with the reporters and stuff there in Cincinnati and interviewing him.
He's great. My favorite type of people are people to interview are people who are honest and energetic, enthusiastic, and thoughtful. Mike Hilton's all those things.
Yeah, and one more thing. You also cover the Reds for the Cincinnati Enquirer. How's it been getting back into Pittsburgh, especially after the pandemic? You've had plenty of chances to see the other stadium on the North Shore here in Pittsburgh. Now you get to see the Heinz Field experience.
Yeah, Pittsburgh has been great. Last time I stayed on the non-ballpark side of the river, so got to experience more downtown. I found a breakfast diner that I really loved and went to all 4 days that I was there. And it's a great walking city, walking across the bridge to the stadium. Nothing but great experiences in Pittsburgh.
And that was Charlie Goldsmith, who covers the Bengals for the Cincinnati Enquirer. Charlie, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, guys. I'll see you soon.
And that was Charlie Goldsmith for the Cincinnati Enquirer. We thank him for coming on the show. And you can follow him at CharlieG_. So, guys, there's a lot that we have to talk about with this game. The NFL Network pundits are still going Steeler crazy. Everyone said the Steelers are going to win this game. And, guys, it feels like a trap.
What a big difference there. The first week, everyone was picking against the Steelers and picking Buffalo. The last week, they were all in on the Steelers. So the Steelers are 1-1, basically where everyone expected them to be, just kind of in different ways here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yes, they are 1-1 in different ways. So the Bengals are 1-1. I think that's expected. I thought they could have beat the Bears, but if their offense showed up a little bit sooner, they beat Minnesota. They played clutch that day. So it's going to be very interesting. This is going to be a lower scoring, drag mouth, classic AFC North type of game. So we're going to see what happens. Remember, it's 3-point spread. So we'll see. And matter of fact, Cincinnati, they always win here, but don't they always seem to play better when they play the Steelers in Pittsburgh rather than at home when they play the Steelers? Haven't you noticed that?
Sometimes.
I think it varies. They're kind of, sometimes they play like last year, for instance, they beat them late in the year at Cincinnati.
Yeah, but most years this is usually like the Steelers blow them out at home, but when it's here, it's close.
I'm not really going to put any stock into this in terms of offense. And Chris, you said the over-under was 43.5. I want to say that's under for me. I'm going 17-14 Steelers. Barely.
Oh,
Pregnant pause over there.
You're definitely going under. I'm a little bit I'm a little wary about this too, because the Steelers got to get this offense going, and I just don't know with all the injuries, but I'm going to go with the Steelers here at home. I won't say they win 24-17.
Wow. If I had guts, which I do, I would pick the Bengals. But I don't have enough guts for right now. I think the Steelers Tom is going to find a way to beat this team somehow, some way. 20-17. Mike Tomlin avoids the Tomlin special. He'll make sure he doesn't get one. There's going to be one this year. For sure. I don't think this is going to be it. So 2017, Steelers at home. Field goal by Boswell at the gun.
Yeah, I think the defense will keep them in the game. And I was surprised when researching for this game that Burrow threw 3 interceptions, and I was on 3 consecutive passes. I was surprised by that. I think in this game, maybe Burrow will throw, maybe a key interception late in the game, and I think the Steelers win a close one. Like I mentioned, 7 points. I have the Steelers winning by.
Well, guys, who do you think is going to be the big-time performer for the Steelers? And this is going to be tentative on a lot of things, but I think if he plays, it's Joe Hayden. It has to be Joe Hayden at this point because the Steelers missed him dearly last week. I don't know if they probably would have got beat by Ruggs because Ruggs is just fast, but I think Hayden would have made a lot of those throws that Derek Carr made a little bit more tougher to make.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know if Hayden would have made a difference on that because that was just a nice play that the Raiders set up. And Ruggs, I think he ran like a 4.27 or something like last year at the Combine. Breakout or key player here. I'm gonna go with Cameron Hayward. I think he's gonna have a real good game in the middle there against that Bengals offensive line that's shaky, especially in the interior part. So. Hayward actually had a pretty good game against the Raiders. I mean, it wasn't like in week 1, like where he arguably had the best game of his career, but I think Hayward really steps up here against the Bengals in week 3.
Okay, we just gonna go defense, all 3 of us, huh, ain't we?
We gotta.
Yeah, we ought to. I'm gonna go with Minkah Fitzpatrick because I know he got burnt that one last week, but if we talk about a critical turnover in a close game, the guy on both teams most likely to make that play, and I know the Steelers do got Watt, but he's still compromised, it's going to be Minkah Fitzpatrick. I see him getting the interception for them winning the game.
To kind of flip things to the offense side, what do you guys think the offense needs to do to really jumpstart their production? Because it's really stale right now. I feel they can't run the ball, and the receivers they make a good play here and there, but it's not on a consistent basis.
I say you give it to if you read grab a Courier, New Pittsburgh Courier. I have an article out. It's going to be answers this question right here. I say you give the ball to Najee Harris 25 times at least. Rather be passing the ball, running it up, running it to the right. Figure it out. Scheme your way to hit for him getting the ball. So if he gets the ball in open space, he's a problem. If he gets the ball in the open field, he's a problem. We can scheme it up. Matt Canada, this is your time to show and prove. You've been doing this for years. It's your first time offensive coordinator in the NFL. Time to prove it.
Yeah, I think actually that's the one thing I'll say in my prediction. I'm predicting 120 yards from scrimmage for Najee Harris in this. I'm going to say 80 rushing and 40 receiving and a touchdown, receiving touchdown.
Yeah, I agree. They have to give Harris more carries. He only had 10 against the Raiders, and then like Charlie was mentioned, Charlie was mentioned that the Bengals, they try to keep balance. Like last week against the Bears, Joe Mixon had 20 carries. So I think that's what the Steelers need to do is keep that run game going. Try to establish the run and incorporate Harris in the passing game too. We saw what he did with that 25-yard catch and run. So it'd be nice to see maybe some screen passes to Harris or something, or any way to get him involved.
And that also helps because Ben's hurt.
Yeah.
So the best play that move you can make is giving Harris the ball.
Yeah, that's what people were saying, that they expect Roethlisberger to get the ball out really quick, kind of like last year's offense with Fichtner and stuff, because the offensive lines, if they can't protect so far, we've seen what we've seen through the first 2 games, and especially last week against the Raiders.
And they need to give Penn State Pat the ball some more too.
And what do you guys think about Matt Canada so far? I saw a stat came out today that the Steelers were ranked 17th in motion or in pre-snap motion, which was kind of interesting because we all heard throughout the offseason that that was Canada's specialty and stuff. Do you think there's a reason why that's not occurring? Maybe you think Roethlisberger saying not doing as much motion, or I don't know. Where do you guys stand on that?
I'm kind of shocked that it's only 17th. Really?
Yeah.
When you think about how much motion it's been, the touchdown for Juju Smith-Schuster was a rushing touchdown off basically a end around near the goal line. I mean, I remember a lot of motion from the Steelers. So my question is, what were these other teams doing that made a higher motion stat with that? Because I specifically remember a ton of motion from this team.
This was according to ESPN. They had the Steelers at 12%, and number one was the 49ers at 42.4%. So
I'm not surprised about that.
Well, yeah. The Niners that high.
Ravens were number two at 27.3%. So the 49ers are doing a significant more ratio than pretty much the entire league, really.
Oh, the Ravens number two. That's not a surprise either.
Yeah. So I don't know. I would like to see Canada, incorporate that, more motion, some more misdirection. I know they've been doing the end arounds, the reverse. Well, not the reverse itself, but the end arounds and the jet sweeps. Claypool, he got blown up on that one end around though this past week.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about that, but guys, I want to leave us with one last happy thing to talk about here, and I'm sure you just noticed it off my TV on the side, but I know the brightness is probably high, at least on your screen. This Friday, James Harrison has a Football Life at 9 p.m. on NFL Network, and that's going to be very interesting to see about that. Let's see how they cover it, because I'm going to be interested to see how they talk about the time where he was thought of being a dirty player. If you remember, he had a couple of those, especially when the NFL was really trying to crack down on helmet-to-helmet hits and a lot of the concussion issues at that time.
Yeah, it should be a good watch. I mean, all those Football Life shows by NFL Films are really good, well done. And I saw the trailer came out recently, and it should be very entertaining to watch.
I concur. I would like to hear his football story from him getting cut 4, 5, 6 times. That would be an interesting call, because that's a story of perseverance. For being cut, being undersized, and I don't think he's going to make the Hall of Fame, but he had a hell of a career, so we have to see that story. Inspiration for most people in the league trying to make the league.
Yeah, he cut by the Steelers, had a cup of coffee with the Ravens, then came back, and the rest was history. And, of course, being from Point Park and having Bill Mushy as a teacher, we also hope that Bill is on that Football Life as well, because he had a lot of stories about James Harrison that if we talked about on air, he would be in very much trouble. And it's not anything really bad per se. It's just, a few embarrassing nicknames from the mother. But regardless, it's going to be a Steeler-packed weekend, as this game will be 1 p.m. at Heinz Field on CBS again, and we're excited for Steelers versus Bengals, one of the best rivalries in the NFL. And that's all for us. For Chris Ward and Brandon Walker, I'm Ty Polk. Thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Our podcast is available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeart, and Spotify.